Hey guys, Pro1701 here, and today I am going to talk about my top 10 favorite Doctor Who stories from the 60s. Now, I haven't seen all of the Doctor Who stories from the 60s, especially the Hartnell era. Most of you know I'm very lacking on the Hartnell era. I've only seen 10 of his stories now, so about a third of his era. Whereas Troughton, I've seen most of his. I've seen probably about over two-thirds of his stuff. So we'll talk about my 10 favorites so far, plus one honorable mention that deserves mentioning. Power of the Daleks. I love this story. This is probably my favorite Troughton story, which is saying a lot considering it's completely animated. None of it exists except for little clips and stills. Especially since, as I've said before, so much of Troughton is down to the physicality of his acting, what he does with his body language, and what he does with his facial expressions. The fact that this story can beat out all the surviving stories as not only my favorite Troughton story, but my favorite story of the 60s, because it is my favorite 60s story overall. These aren't in any particular order overall, but it is my favorite 60s story. Really shows just how good the story is. I love the story. I think this story gets the Daleks right. And I think most Doctor Who stories don't, especially in the modern series. Dalek does in the modern series. Because it remembers that the Daleks are geniuses. They're intelligent, they're cunning, they're manipulative. And they have no problems deceiving whatever and lying through their teeth if it helps them achieve their goals. And they do a lot of manipulating in this, pretending to be subservient to the humans, so they can achieve their goals, get their power, recreate themselves in secret until they're ready to take over, and then everything's fair game. And it's interesting because this is one of those stories where we as the audience know more than the people at the base, outside of the Doctor, really. We know that they're manipulative, that they're lying, and that these people are foolish for trusting them. And watching the dawning horror as they figure out what's going on late in the story. This is really exemplified through Lesterson as we watch him progress through the story as he starts out as this very intelligent scientist, very professional, got that thirst for scientific knowledge, even if he moves quicker than he should. And then we slowly see him become more and more paranoid about these things as he realizes what the Doctor says is right. And we see him slowly just losing it as he becomes panicked and he's trying to warn everybody, he was right, they have to be destroyed, to the point to where he ultimately just snaps at the end. He just breaks. It's just gone. I am your servant. And he just says that back to the Daleks. And when they shoot him, he's just... It's really, really neat to see this genius mind just get utterly broken like that. Troughton is really good in this from what we can get from the audio, and the way they do the animation is really good, especially the special edition. I really like the special edition. I know some people didn't double down because they were fine with the 2016 version, but I really think it's worth double dipping to get the special edition. I don't even watch the original version anymore. I much prefer the special edition. I enjoyed Ben and Polly in it. I like how Ben is skeptical, where Polly is a little more understanding about what's going on, just like the audience is having to sort their feelings out, I'm sure, at the time it was originally aired, about whether they were going to accept someone else, especially someone so drastically different, playing the Doctor. But the story works on so many levels. It's a great post-regeneration story, especially since it's the first post-regeneration story. It needed to be great, and it pulls it off really, really well. It's a great Dalek story, one of the best. I think when I ranked the Dalek stories from worst to best, this one was ranked at number 2 on the list. It's a great Troughton story. It's just an all-around really good story. I love Power of the Daleks. The Moonbase. This is probably my subjective favorite of the 60s Cyberman stories. I really like the Moonbase a lot. I know the plot is similar to 10th Planet, but I feel like it executes better than the 10th Planet does. Because the 10th Planet, I think the first two parts are really good, and then the third and fourth parts kind of suffer. Part 3 because Hartnell's obviously not there, and part 4 is because I find some of the camera, while I like the animation style, some of the camera work for the animation feels really weird and wonky with the close-ups and everything, and very jarring. The Moonbase, I think they really, Planet 55 really perfected their animation with this one. It's my favorite of all the animations we've had so far. I think it captures the likenesses of the characters really well, and Troughton's mannerisms are pretty accurate. And then the 2 surviving episodes are just gold. I love the 2 surviving episodes. 2 of the episodes I wish we could find more than anything would be Moonbase 1 and 3. I'd love to have this story complete. And it's got one of the best cliffhangers, I think, in all of Doctor Who with the cliffhanger to episode 2 when the Doctor's like, did they search in here? Your men, they searched everywhere. Did they search in here? I love that. I absolutely love that cliffhanger. I'm not keen on the Cybermen design in this story, and I really don't care for their voice in this story because I can't understand what the heck they're saying. But the actual plot of the story I like. I love the scenery of the Cybermen walking around on the moon's surface. I like the incidental music in the story a lot, and then Troughton is just great in it. And this is also the story that has Troughton's favorite, his iconic speech about there are some corners of the universe which have read the most terrible things, and I love that speech. So yeah, I absolutely love the Moonbase. This one may be an odd choice, but a lot of this is down to how much I think the animation just really lifts the story. I was never really familiar with the Macra Terror. I saw Gridlock before I even knew what the Macra Terror were, so when he references them in Gridlock, I kind of wondered, is that a callback to Classic Who? So I did some research on it. And Macra Terror really, it was kind of that story. People were like, they're animating that one next. And it's kind of a shame that, you know, they got Sun and Moon Studios, who is phenomenal. I love Macra Terror's animation. And it's a shame that it's for this story instead of, like, say, Evil of the Daleks and Fury from the Deep, because that would have been gold to have that quality of animation for those. Although Evil's is still really good. But I love the animation. The liberties they take with Macra Terror really, really improve it. Because when you look at the surviving footage and the stills, it does have that kind of B-movie giant insect thing going from like the 50s. Whereas in this, the way they make the Macra more lifelike, the way they scuttle on the ground, the use of light and shadow, and the use of just seeing their eyes in the dark as they come out. The incidental music doesn't quite match that, but I'm willing to forgive it. Troughton, again, is great. I love the character designs. When the characters move, there's a very fluid movement that they've never been able to capture since. None of the stories post-Macra have been as good as Macra. None of them. And when they turn and when they move, it has a natural flow to it that looks really good. It's not choppy at all. Also, Troughton's mannerisms, I think, are better here than they've ever been in animation. The way he moves, the way his face moves, his body language feels very, very spot on. It feels like Troughton, which most of the animations don't nail as close as this does. This is very, very accurate. I love the scene when he's writing on the board. That's very Troughton when he does that. You know, a 10 out of 11, he goes, 11 out of 10, or he goes 10 out of 10 and then 11 out of 10. It feels very Troughton. So yeah, because of this, I have a strong love for the Macra Terror. It's one of my favorite Troughton stories because the animation just elevates the story so much more. I find it an interesting story to begin with. Evil of the Daleks. This is a good one. The animation for this is really good as well. It's not as good as Macra Terror, but it's an improvement over what they did with the Faceless ones. And I like the animation from the Faceless ones. Evil's is really good, and it shows what BBC Studios can do with it when they're given time to work on it. I'd never experienced Evil before, so I was curious to see how it stacked up with Power, since I know they're both by David Whittaker. And while I think Power is the better story, I still think Evil is really nice. I like how part of it takes place in the 60s, or the 1960s, and then it gets, you know, they get transported back in time 100 years, and they're in the Victorian manor house for a good chunk of the story, and then the last 2 episodes, they're on Skaro. It's really nice. The black and white version of it is good. The color version of it is good. For the most part, the animation is pretty smooth. There's a couple parts where It's definitely not as refined as Macra, but it still works. I think Troughton has done really well. I love the way they did the Daleks with the 3D look again. And it's just another really good Dalek story. And it's nice to see the Emperor Dalek for the first time. And the story is, it gets so many points from me because I love the human factor Daleks. They're just adorable. The Doctor Friend. I love the human factor Daleks. To be able to make the Daleks adorable so easily, with the same voices even, just the way they do the voices is so adorable is the only word I can think of to use. And it'd be interesting to where if no one had ever seen the Daleks, say someone who wasn't aware of Doctor Who, they didn't know what the Daleks were, and they ran into a human factor Dalek, they just think it was the cutest thing ever. So that's really neat to me. Next on the list is The Reign of Terror, one of my two favorite Hartnell stories. I like The Reign of Terror. I rewatched it recently. I think Hartnell is just amazing in it. I think all of the cast do a pretty good job in it. I mean, Susan's annoying, but Susan's always annoying. That's not Caroline Ann Ford's fault. Susan's just annoying. I think Barbara is great in it, and she has a lot of good standout moments. Ian is really good in it. I enjoy the guest cast. I love the cliffhanger to episode 1 with the house burning. I think they actually pull that effect off with the model shot really, really well. And it's just nice to see a pure historical. I actually wish Doctor Who would go back and do more of those. It's done really well here, where they're just they end up in a period in time where they don't need to be, and they just kind of have to get out. You know, it's kind of like Caves of Androzani, but in the past. They're in a spot where they don't need to be, and they need to just get the heck out of there. Except for at least in Reign of Terror, they do have some friendly, my nose itches, they have some friendly faces there to help them at least. It's a really, really good story. One of my favorite Doctor Who stories set in the past. Next on the list is The Invasion, which is probably objectively the best Cyberman story from the 60s. It's a shame that 2 of the episodes are missing, but I think the animation for episodes 1 and 4 is fine, especially considering it was the first one to be animated. It was done in 2006. I think the animation holds up really well. I rewatched it just recently. My nose won't stop itching. Yeah, it's got... Douglas Camfield is just an amazing Doctor Who director. I absolutely tend to just love Douglas Camfield stories, and he is on point here. Some of the location work is just so iconic here, with the Cybermen walking down the steps at St. Paul's Cathedral and the Daleks coming out of the sewers, or the Cybermen coming out of the sewers, and then the Cybermen walking around in the sewers, and of course the Cybermen busting out of the little cocoon thing. That's just iconic Doctor Who imagery. Some of the most iconic I think the show's ever had. And then the fact that we don't even see the Cybermen until halfway through the story at the very end of episode 4. But you're still captivated by everything going on. One, because Tobias Vaughn is just such a good human character. Such a good human villain. He is so good. He's such a joy to watch. And then Packard is really nice too. He's just this kind of almost sadistic type character. You can tell he takes glee when he gets to inflict pain on others. You can see him kind of smiling about it. They're both really well done. Packard might be a little two-dimensional, but I think he's done pretty well. And both of the actors portraying them do a fantastic job. I really like Vaughn throughout this story, though. I really, really enjoy him. And then it's nice to see the Brigadier back, actually promoted up to Brigadier now. It's good to see Nicholas Courtney again. It's always good to see Nicholas Courtney. So it's nice to see the formation of UNIT for the first time in Doctor Who here. And I love how well the Brigadier and Troughton get along. Whereas the Brigadier and the third Doctor kind of butted heads sometimes. They didn't always see eye to eye. The second Doctor and Troughton and the second Doctor and the Brigadier really mesh well together. They are on much more friendly terms. I guess it's because Troughton is not as much of the alpha male type as Pertwee's Doctor is. You know, and anytime Troughton makes a suggestion, the Brigadier's like, yeah. I mean, even in Web of Fear, you know, the Brigadier just tends to, or the Colonel, I should say, in that one, Lethbridge Stewart, tends to just trust him immediately, which I like. And it's the same way here. He's very trusting of the Doctor, and I like when the Brigadier lets Zoe do the calculations, you know. He doesn't even argue with it. He just give her 30 seconds. I love the fact that since she's a friend of the Doctor's, the Brigadier automatically trusts her, despite the Brigadier having kind of his own old-fashioned views towards women. As we see that more in later stories, and then actually some here too, where he kind of the men do the fighting and all that, but he does tell them to let her do her stuff. If she can do it, give her 30 seconds. I love that. I really love that. But yeah, it's really good. And in 8 parts, it never drags. I never feel like the invasion drags. Much like Inferno with its 7 parts, I feel like it's paced very well. And much like Colony in Space, the fact it waits until halfway through the story to kind of introduce the main villain, kind of like how Colony waits until halfway through to introduce the Master. I think that really helps with the pacing. So yeah, really good story. The War Games. This is a good one. I still think it's good at 10 parts. I know some people probably find it a little repetitive because they are getting captured and escaping a lot. But for me, it never really drags. I always enjoy my watch through of the War Games. Granted, the payoff is episode 10, so it's kind of like listening to Stairway to Heaven, as you're listening to the whole song, getting to where the music picks up at the end, and that's kind of the climax of the song. This is kind of like building up to the climax of the story with the War Game, so I'm always in anticipation while I'm watching it. I like seeing David Troughton in it. That's really neat. I enjoy the mystery of watching them figure out what's going on slowly when they start slipping into other time zones, and the Doctor realizes, wait a minute, I'm not on Earth, there's more going on here. Meeting another one of the Time Lord's people with the war chief, finding out the Doctor stole the TARDIS. That's really neat in this story. Watching the Doctor sacrifice his freedom to save everyone, a very Doctor thing to do. The fact that he doesn't want to do that because he knows better than to call attention to himself. He prefers to lay low and just stay out of the Time Lord's way, because at this point in Doctor Who history, the Time Lords, even though this is the first time we really learn about him, you can tell that he's just kind of a little fly on their radar. As long as he doesn't call attention to himself, they kind of leave him alone. I love the finale of episode 9 when they're trying to run away and everything's going in slow motion. It's such an easy effect, but it's so effective. I love the fact that the Time Lords can manipulate time so easily without even really trying. They were like gods here, and I just love that. The best portrayal of the Time Lords is in the story. And then, of course, episode 10 is just one of the best episodes of Doctor Who ever made. I absolutely adore the War Games. I do. Next up is the Mind Robber. This one is a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. I saw it for the first time this year, and I love how it leans into its whole fantasy setting. It's Doctor Who being Doctor Who when it does those different type of stories that only really Doctor Who can do. Much like Ghostlight, I really enjoy the Mind Robber, and I think they use their limited budget to good effect here, because they know the budget is not there. The budget's never there in classic Who, and so they take this very minimalist approach to this world, like in episode 1 when everything's just kind of that blank white or gray field, and to how they do the setups in the later episodes, like the trees that turn out to be letters. But all of these things combine to make this a wonderful story. I really like In the House. The house looks like a B-movie set when you walk in and you see the spider web with the spider in the middle. It looks fake, but it fits that story. It looks like a limited budget 50s movie. Since it's in that fantasy setting, that works out. And then you also have the Minotaur and the stuff with Medusa. The Medusa stuff's a little shaky, but again, it fits the fantasy style of the story really, really well. Yeah, I really like the Mind Robber. It's one of those unique Doctor Who stories that I think I'm gonna probably revisit at least once a year for a while. It's really, really good. The Ark. This is another one of my favorite First Doctor stories. I really like the Ark. I've talked before about it. I think the Monoids are a really neat race, and I love how they change over the course of the story. how they're so subservient. They're the servants basically in the first half of the story, and how when the Doctor arrives back on the ship, hundreds or thousands of years later, whichever it is, how it's completely flipped, and now they're the ones in the control, and they're tyrannical and stuff like that, and they're cruel and harsh. And you see how they change. It's a neat way to flip the script on that, and I love the fact that the twist comes like halfway through the story, not like toward the ends of the story. It's almost like the arc is two separate stories, with the second half of it being a sequel to the first half. You really could have done the first 2 episodes of the arc as a story called the arc, done another story or 2, and then come back later in the season and done Return to the Ark and had episodes 3 and 4 be a story as well. And that really would have worked. The cliffhanger of episode 2 with the statue, I think, is one of the best cliffhangers in Doctor Who. I really, really liked it. I enjoyed it a lot. Plus, I just enjoyed the first Doctor in it. Dodo is fine, and I don't really have too many problems with Dodo in it. Steven, is it Steven? I think it's Steven. I'm still adjusting to him at this point. Yeah, Steven. I'm still adjusting to Steven a bit. I'm just not as familiar with his character. Ooh, my. But yeah, I love the art. I think that's essential first Doctor watching, in my opinion. Of course, I have to have Web of Fear. While I think it's a little overrated, I do think Web of Fear is essential Doctor Who watching. Not only does it introduce the Brigadier, but it is a good story. It's a nice sequel to Abominable Snowmen. How they're kind of the heads and tails of each other. It's nice to see Professor Travers, who in real life was Deborah's father, Jack Watley. So that's pretty cool. And I like the Yeti in it. They have a simplistic design, but I think it works really well. I like the incidental music in it. I love the atmospheric, claustrophobic feel of the sewers in it. And they look really, really, you'd think they actually filmed down in the London sewers. It's a really convincing set. They did a really good job with it. Love the use of lighting in it. It just looks, it has that kind of creepy, atmospheric look to it that I really enjoy in Doctor Who. So yeah, Web of Fear is, we're so blessed that it was rediscovered and that we have most of the story now. We have 5 out of the 6 episodes. It's a real blessing to have that. So I really like Web of Fear. Tomb of the Cybermen, you have to give that a shout out. While I find Tomb a little overrated, it is a complete Troughton story. It's a complete Troughton Cyberman story, and it definitely has a lot of iconic moments, like the Doctor's conversation with Victoria about family, and then of course the Cybermen waking up and coming out of their little storage units there when they wake up. That's iconic imagery, and it is a good story. It's certainly not a bad story. It's a good. It's better than almost any Cyberman story in the modern series. Not that that's a high bar to beat, mind you. But it is good, and I enjoy it, and I love watching Troughton in it. Doesn't quite make my top 10. I don't quite love it as much as some people do. It does have its flaws. It's interesting because Tomb of the Cybermen, before it was found, was heralded as one of the greats, and then it was found, and people kind of realized it wasn't quite as good as everybody remembered it being. But then over the past few years, I've noticed it's kind of getting that high status again, where people seem to be thinking it's everything in a bag of chips, which is fine. I mean, if you love Tomb of the Cybermen, you love Tomb of the Cybermen. It is a really good Doctor Who story. So yeah, that's my my list of top 10 stories from 60s Doctor Who. I would like to know what you think of this list, what you agree with, what you disagree with. So comment down below and let me know what you guys think. Other things to do: click the like button, click the subscribe button. Click the bell for notifications. I am over 600 subscribers now. I'm very, very grateful for that. It's really nice to see the channel growing, trying to get it to 1,000. So if you watch my channel and haven't subscribed, I hope today is the day I earn that subscription. So check that out for me. I also have a Patreon if you like what I do and would like to contribute to what I do. A very special shout out to the 5th Doctor, who is a top tier patron, my very first top tier patron, which really makes my day. And a special thank you to all of my other patrons as well. I have a couple polls up right now that'll be running through probably most of December, probably running through around Christmas One is voting on which classic Doctor Who story I will be reviewing next. That will be a Patreon exclusive review. And then I just put up another one, which is which 10th Doctor story I will be reviewing as a Patreon exclusive review. And some of the ones on that include The Idiot's Lantern, Midnight, if anyone's interested in hearing review Midnight, because some of y'all know I'm not the biggest fan of Midnight, Tooth and Claw, and a couple more. It's 5 choices, I believe. If you're interested in that, those reviews will be exclusive to my patrons. But most importantly, though, thank you for watching. Honorable mention. Who was the honorable mention?